Welcome back to Double Fries, No Slaw. It is Sunday, February 23rd, a short month, so the last Sunday of the month. TJ Pittenger, Richie Barnes here to talk all things FSU football. Appreciate our friends over at Guthrie's, Garnet and Gold, Rowback, and of course we'll give Bet you guys some love here in a little bit. But Richie, how's your weekend been, man? How you doing?
Pretty good. Spent the entire day out of the house yesterday. One of our good high school friends decided to have like a quasi, I guess, high school reunion. We're all still friends in group chats, but rarely do we all get together. So there was about 15 of us and our significant others and kids running around the pool that we all have known for about 20 years each. So it was really fun to, reminisce on all the high school stories, the trouble we got into, all that good stuff. And, today's just a take it easy day.
Yeah, good stuff. Um, yeah, the weekend's been. I feel like the weekends fly by, but the
Yeah.
weeks are. We didn't do much yesterday. Elena had a softball game, and then we didn't do anything last night. We just kind of hung out, watched softball, which was a little bit depressing, and then I watched the Lakers game and went to bed. Like it was just kind of a chill day. Today we went to church. I went to memorial service after church, and then here we are at this point. So yeah, the weekends go by really quickly, even on a Saturday when you don't do anything at all. So.
Yeah.
But let's get into things and talk a little FSU. Might be a shorter episode. There's not a ton going on right now, but we did get some updates, some good news for the Noles, and then some other things going on. Appreciate our friends over at Guthrie's. Make sure that if you're in Tallahassee or any surrounding locations or really anywhere with the Guthrie's, you are stopping by and getting your gut box double fries, no slaw. We appreciate them, especially the Tallahassee locations, which you can visit at 1818 West Tennessee Street, 2550 North Monroe, and 2870 Appalachia Parkway. They've always been good to us. They always take care of us. I actually am hoping, Richie, I don't know. We've talked about some road games and stuff, like what we may want to do. I'm starting to buy into this Charlottesville thing. Like I'm starting to, this Friday night in Charlottesville sounds like it might be the move. And if it is, like I'm trying to see if we can get Guthrie's to get up there as well. So
A lot of Noles in the DMV area.
I mean, I think it's going to be pretty well attended. Like I floated the idea of a tailgate on Twitter, and yeah, like people were pretty excited about the chance at that happening, and so I'd really like to get Guthrie's to get some chicken up there. I don't think they have a location super close, so I don't know how we would do that. But I mean, they don't have one in New Orleans either, and we figured that out. So, time and space and all that stuff is not really too big of a deal for me. All right, let's get into things. Harlan, I did not set this up on YouTube very well, so if you could go do that real quick, and then we'll jump into this first segment. But Florida State lands a commitment from a safety down in South Florida this week. Karen Maycock, a three-star safety out of Miami Central High School. He's 6'1", 200 pounds. As a junior, Richie, he totaled 62 tackles, 17 of them for loss. He had 3 pass breakups, 8 sacks, and 2 forced fumbles in just 8 games there at Miami Central. And Florida State, well, let's talk about him for just a minute, but Florida State piling up a decent start to this class, and I know what people will say about recruiting. I understand that every time, like it doesn't matter until they sign. I get all that. But when something happens, we are still going to talk about it. So as much as the comments are going to be littered with, well, it doesn't matter until they sign, I understand that. Florida State's starting to put together a fairly good class for 26. And I mean, we know that that's what they need to do to eventually find success long-term, especially under Mike Norvell. But a good pickup, somebody that, I know people will say, oh, just a 3-star. This is somebody that Miami was in on heavy, Florida, Alabama, big-time programs that do a really good job, and Pat Surtain went out and won a battle.
Yeah, and sometimes with the ranking website's a little late to the party. These coaches are really good at evaluating that so they get where they're at. And sometimes you see a 5-star and you're like, is he really a 5-star? Sometimes you see a 3-star and you said, oh, that guy's got potential. So I really prefer looking at offer sheets and are these legitimate offers or not? And I think all of these offers were legitimate where they all would have taken his commitment today. Sometimes you have kids out there who have an offer, but if they tried to commit, the coach would say, well, just hold off a little bit, make sure you're making the right decision, kind of slow play him a little bit. That happens as well. But, I do think both Miami and Alabama would have taken his offer. One of the beat writers on the 247 Miami site actually loaded a crystal ball for him with a 6 out of 10 confidence. So he definitely Miami. So I think it's a good win, and getting back into South Florida, Miami Central is, you know what, I believe that's where Dalvin went. Not a bad place to get some kids from. So I think it's a really strong pickup. But I do think he's someone that, and anyone who's followed recruiting long enough will know that when it comes to South Florida kids, especially, first commitment often is not their only commitment. So it will be a battle to signing day, but it's always good to be the team that they're committed to, as opposed to trying to flip them. And, we're always going to do well with recruiting defensive backs, but it's still nice to beat out schools like Alabama and Miami for a kid like this.
Yeah, I actually just saw another update from something that was a little bit more recent. It says he's actually 6'2", so pretty rangy, got good size. We're not going into a full, necessarily like breakdown, but yeah, that was my biggest takeaway too, was what you just said. Like the fact that they were able to, crystal balls, I feel like have evolved a little bit. And I used to like what Newberg did when he would, in like January, February, like project out, or it actually might even have been the summer, because kids seem to wrap up their commitments a lot earlier now. Like they kind of shut them down in the summer, or they commit after their visits, and you don't have as many commitments happening in the college football or the high school football season, which is the fall. And so I used to like what Newberg did when he would just project out a bunch of crystal balls. Like, here's my feeling in April, what's going to happen with this kid. And then you'd find out like how good he was at it in December. Whereas now I feel like the crystal ball has evolved a little bit into where it's, hey, I just got intel. I think this kid's about to commit. Like that's what, there's nothing that drives me crazier than when you see a crystal ball or a prediction from On3 or something come in, and then the kid commits like 4 minutes later. And I'm like, all right, guys, did you need to up your accuracy that much? Like, did we need that, 4 minute, and not just at FSU, like everywhere. Did we need that 4 minute heads up of what was about to happen? But that seems like it's what that has divulged into, which is fine, right? Like, but for this to have been in, that crystal ball was placed late January, and here we are, late February, just a month later, and the kid commits to Florida State, and Miami probably had some pretty good traction there, and to beat them out is a big deal. I mean, let's call a spade a spade.
For a hometown
Mario has out recruited Mike every year that Mike's been, that they've been there, right? Like, so any win you can get against them is really impressive, and it's a really good job. But what you said is absolutely correct, especially South Florida recruits that are skill position, right? Like skill position or DB or whatever, like a kind of a flashy position type. That one's not over until pen really does meet paper. And so everything we've bragged on, everything we've, kind of given them some credit for, buckle up, because, we'll see what happens in December.
There will be some updates on him throughout the summer, I think, for sure.
Taking an official visit to Florida State, to Miami, other places, like, I believe he's going to take his official visits, like, which he very much should. But I do think that it's, you'd rather play defense on, on a kid than have to flip him away, which Florida State had some success late flipping some kids. I actually thought about it the other day, like an article came out with kind of the, here's who's turning heads, and like 4 of them were Florida State flips, right? A flip from Auburn, a flip from Ole Miss, a flip from UCF, and a flip from UF as kind of some of the premier pieces of this class, which was a big deal. 2026 in general, Florida State has the number 11 class. Now, it's incredibly early. They only have 7 commits. Everybody around them has a similar amount, but your top 10 is USC, Oregon, A&M, Penn State. Kansas has 12 commits. Their average is really low. I'd expect them to drop out. Illinois has 9 commits. Their average, again, not great, but they'll probably drop out. Tennessee, Notre Dame, Auburn, LSU, and Florida State. It's really early, but we've talked about this. If he's not able to recruit like a top 10 class, if he's not able to get like up around that number of like 12-ish, I don't know that it's going to work out long term. Like you've retooled your staff to maybe have more recruiters that can get the job done. And I'm not trying to say like it's an indictment if they finish 13th or anything like that. But if you're never able to really turn this thing around and get up to where, to me, if you can recruit in the top 12 consistently, you should be, especially in an easy conference, which we're in, hopefully not too much longer. But if you can't recruit top 12 consistently, which should put you at like 2 or 3 worst case scenario in the ACC, then you're just never going to make it, right? Like that. I mean, at the end of the day, they've got to hold strong here, and whatever progress they show on the field will be a big impact on this too. But if they can't hold around that 11, 12, 13 range, and
Mhm.
maybe even get better, I think we kind of see the writing on the wall.
I agree with you, and especially when Jimbo first started, we got used to signing, top five, top two, number one classes every year he was here. I think his very first year, coming off a terrible season in Bobby's last year, they had the number 10 class. So, I do think Florida State fans, for the time being, should adjust their expectations of where we should be. Top three should not be an expectation in the world of NIL with what the SEC and the Big Ten have on you right now in terms of financials. But I do think it's not unreasonable to ask for a top 10 or 12 class every single year. There's no reason Florida State should ever finish in the 20s. If you let Ole Miss beat you out for a kid over NIL, that's a problem. I know they have a very strong NIL program. They are in the SEC, but with your recruiting base here, with Miami to Tallahassee to South Georgia being where you're really going to get most of your guys, and then going out and picking up a couple guys nationally, there's no reason you should not be. A bad year should be number 15. A
Yeah.
good year should be number 4. A great year should be top 3. But do think we need to adjust our expectations slightly because going back to the Bobby in the late 80s through the 90s, and then Jimbo from his second to fifth year. Well, even his last year, he had a great class going until he stopped recruiting. Um, we aren't in that time frame anymore. College football evolves, and that is certainly what has happened. But I think top 10 should be an expectation, but you're not going to get upset if you're signing the number 12 or 13 class in an off year. It's like your sales quota this quarter is $100,000, and you hit 95K. You're not going to get fired for that. You're like, okay, let's just bump that up next quarter, make sure we make up for our losses last quarter. I think that's kind of where at least I'm looking at recruiting with Florida State moving forward, at least in the near or the immediate future.
Yeah, like in the next 3 or 4 years, it would surprise me if Florida State's ever able to crack that top 5, just with their resources, the NIL, just the different things in play. I think Florida State's got a good NIL setup. I think their NIL setup is better than outside of 2 of the 5 years. Their NIL product's been better than their on-field product, and so I think that's going to keep you in battles. But you've got teams and programs that have better NIL than you and are actually winning on the field. And so, you look, for example. We had the 20th ranked recruiting class, or right around there. Maybe it bumped up to like 19th or something. At Georgia Tech was 21, and there's really no reason that you should be recruiting around Georgia Tech. Now, we've talked about getting a top 20 class with 2 wins is in and of itself a little bit impressive. So you get the one off, kind of, you under recruited. But I mean, for most of his tenure, Mike Norvell has under recruited, if we're being honest, right? And so they've done a good job in the portal. We understand the volatility in that after the last 2 years, better than anybody. And so, we've always said this. We've always said it starts with recruiting, and hopefully what they're doing in 26 so far is a sign of good things to come. Like I said, if they went out, I don't even really care what they do on field. I mean, I do, certainly. We live and breathe and die this stuff. But no matter what they do on field, right, if it's somewhere, we talked about this before we started, if it's somewhere between 6 and 8 wins, and they can land a top 10-ish class if they're 12, 13, somewhere in that range, higher than 15 for sure. If they can be in that field, I'll feel like that was progress. And then I think they need to consistently be around that number 10 number, and pushing up higher, over the next few years.
Yeah, and to your point, getting into the top 5, it almost take an act of Congress at this point. Because think about who you're trying to chase down right now. Ohio State, you're not catching them. Georgia, no. Alabama, no. Texas, no. Oregon, no. A&M, probably not, just because they will probably offer double NIL for some players, and that will be enough. So he needs to develop relationships, develop them early, show that, last season was a one-off. It's never going to happen again. And as he continues to hire new assistants each year, put a heavy focus on recruiting, because you can't win without good players. I've learned that this season in my college football dynasty, where my roster is just terrible. My fastest receiver is at 87, and I'm averaging like 17 points a game. So get the players and figure everything else out.
Yeah, without a doubt. I will give some love to Bet US and then we'll move on a little bit. Bet US, make sure that if you're betting on college basketball, shout out our women's hoops team that got a big win today on the road at number 20 Georgia Tech. If you're betting on any of it, college basketball, you're betting on the NBA. I was watching the Lakers last night. Just whatever you've got going, make sure that you're betting with Bet US. YouTube 150 is the code that will get you a 150% sign up bonus on your first deposit. Your next two deposits are 125%. All of that up to $2,000. We appreciate Bet US for their support. Again, it's YouTube 150. Richie, Mike Norvell, a little bit of an innovator, a trendsetter, if you will. His hand forced on this a little bit, but Florida State was the first team and program to cancel their spring game. Now, obviously, that has a lot to do with the renovations at Doak, and we've had some other changes around college football in Nebraska. Matt Rule talking about he didn't want his players being scouted and then tampered with. And, at first I kind of took that as just whining, right? But then I kind of thought like, oh wait, new offensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator. We stole a lot of their staff. Like maybe he really does have a legitimate gripe there to not want to showcase some of his players. Since then, Texas is getting it's not just like one or two. So anyway, it seems to be kind of the trend in college football. Richie, is it a hot take to say that in 2 years, I don't know if it'll be all the way done by the 2026 spring. It would shock me in 2027 if we had traditional spring games. And that might even be underselling it. Like we might not have them next year. You're muted.
And honestly, there is no point of having a spring game, in my opinion. The risk to reward just is not there. Spring games are for the fans, and most fans don't care about it unless they get excited. They have a new head coach, who has a lot of, a big name, and he's coming in, and you're just excited. Like we saw with Willie Taggart's spring game, right? That crowd was amazing. But the game itself, does anybody remember anything outside of the double pass? Because I don't. I think that spring games are pretty pointless. I think it's good. Just use it as an extra practice and maybe open it up to the media. I know Florida State opens all their practices up to the media, but other schools say, hey, we're going to have a scrimmage. It's not going to be the most exciting. It's not going to be like a game. It's going to be situational. It's going to be, third and short, fourth and short, third and long. But yeah, I just don't see the excitement of a spring game. For some fans, it's nice because it's a cheap way to go back to your favorite team's school campus to just reminisce and go to your favorite places to eat, like Guthrie's, or just meet up with old friends. But as a program, there's really no benefit. You're not raising a ton of money at these spring games. You raise all your money on the spring booster tour. I just don't see the point of them. There was a time where they were kind of exciting for a little bit. When your team's good, obviously you're going to have better spring turnout. Obviously, the stadium's under renovation right now, so it makes sense not to have the spring game. But coming off a 2-win season, you might be lucky to have 20,000 people show up in Tallahassee. But in general, and even if you do have spring games, I think they almost turn into bowl games in that your best returning players are not going to play. Because there's no point. We all remember Antonio Cromartie, one of the best athletes ever at Florida State, who never did much on the field, but we all knew was going to be a superstar in the NFL. He got hurt in the offseason. So why risk injury? Or if you want to have a spring game, make it like a fun weekend, have different events going on. And I hate to say it because I don't even watch it anymore, but make it like the Pro Bowl, turn it into a flag football game to really limit that risk of injury. But even then, you can still tear your ACL playing flag football. I've seen it happen in intramural flag football games.
Yeah, I'll tell you where it sucks. It does suck for I've talked with folks at Garnet and Gold. I've talked with folks at Guthrie's, and it doesn't make or break their year, especially the way that Norvell has done spring games. He has made them a little more situational, and they're not like a true game like some programs continue to do. But it does suck for some of those local businesses that, when they built their business, they counted on that revenue, right? Like, hey, we're going to have a very seasonal type of business that we know that we'll do good business here or there, and we'll be fine. But man, those 6 or 7 weekends in the fall, that one weekend in the spring, we'll get some baseball, basketball, softball, trickle in too. It does suck for the local businesses. And so I don't want to completely gloss over it and just say oh, well, just it doesn't matter, because it does matter for some people. But I heard this take, and you've got some good points. I've got a couple of thoughts on this, not necessarily just on Florida State, but when you think about Nebraska canceling, when you think about Texas, we had Brooks. I think we've had Brooks Austin on here before to talk about the game before. We talked about the bowl game in the 2023 season with Brooks, and he brought this up, and I thought it was a pretty good point. I don't know how much of it's Matt Rule not wanting his players to get tampered with, because let's not act like we don't know who. Everybody recruited all these kids. Everybody watched all these kids play last year. Like, there aren't really a lot of hidden gems out there that nobody knew about. Like, we know who most of the good players are on most of the teams. And there are entire scouting departments that are like staffed right now to tamper, right? Like to go, hey, who are the good players on these teams that we need to have back channeled to tamper with? So I think it is a huge expenditure, though, a huge cost to Florida State. And this is what Brooks said. If I'd have thought about it, I'd have pulled his clip, but it's the film guy on YouTube. Go check out Brooks. He does a great job. But it's a huge expenditure, because you have to hire all the security, you have to hire all the game day staff, you have to, hire Tallahassee Police Department, everybody else like to come out and work the game, and then you don't make any money, right? Tickets are $5 each, which means nothing, right? It's $100,000 at the end of the day if 20,000 people show up, but it doesn't move the needle at all, right? And so you got all these expenses, and right now with revenue sharing coming in, with NIL crazier than it's ever been, with all the questions on how budgets are going to be balanced and the things, or maybe even sports, that are going to be cut, does it really make sense for the school to invite anywhere between 20 and 80,000 people to their campus to put on a spring game or a spring showcase or whatever you're going to call it, with very little return, right? Like, especially with the financial issues that so many schools are in because of rev sharing, because of suing their conference, because of whatever's going on. It's being labeled as like this tampering thing. I just think it's, hey man, we don't have the money to just blow right now on a spring game that, and I'm not saying the tampering thing is not part of it. I'm not saying that, obviously in our situation with the renovations, that's really why it happened. But that's why I think by 2027, there won't be a spring game type thing anymore. I don't know. So that's my thought on that. Secondly, you mentioned this. I love what Ole Miss did. Like, Ole Miss they had like different competitions. They did not have a spring game last year. They more so made it like the Pro Bowl, right? Like, they had kind of fun things going on, 7-on-7, stupid stuff like, do a pie eating contest. I don't care, right? Like, just something I'll tell you, if you could combine what Ole Miss does and what UF does, and I hate to give them credit, but I'm going to. The way that they do, and we did this the first year of the Battle's End, did like the player autographs and the signings and stuff. And the Battle's End has kept up like doing stuff. So it's not just UF, but UF like incorporates it so well. Their buy-in is so big on the university side, the program side, the athletic side, that they do such a good job of like, they make it very personal. You can go down and meet the players, and they do signings before and after. And shoot, I think they were allowed to like go down on the field or something after. Don't quote me on that, but if you could combine the idea of like what Ole Miss did along with what UF did, now that would still be an expense, but if you center it around NIL or around like giving back to the players, that is a good way to, hey, you may not go dollar for dollar on your day of, but if those people are then sign up to give to the program in a way that is either through the boosters or through NIL, your collective or whatever, not just Florida State, but all programs, that'd be a smart thing to do. Because if you said like, hey, this is going to cost us $150,000 to put on a spring game, or $200,000, I don't know what the cost is to put on a spring game, but hey, it's going to cost us $250,000, but we're going to raise $2 million over the year because of NIL and people giving back and stuff. Like, that to me seems like a good investment. Again, I'm just throwing numbers out there. I don't know what it costs to put it on. I don't know how much you could actually raise. But if you could combine what Ole Miss and Florida are doing, that would be the best situation. Because I agree with you. It is a great opportunity for, I would take my kids to a spring game before I'd take them to the Bama game, right? Like, it's a more chill atmosphere. There's less people. It is like we're all starved for football. We're talking about it here in late February because we love it. And so you're kind of giving something back to the fans a little bit, who are essentially supporting, making the program, stay afloat with their donations. So I don't know. Those are some of my thoughts. Like, it would be really cool if you could see not just Florida and Ole Miss, but other programs kind of adapt and make it like a fan-centric thing. I don't know if that ends up happening. Maybe they don't do anything, but it'd be cool if there was something in the spring.
Yeah, to respond to both of those points real quickly, Cassie, as my friend who hosted the party on Saturday, which is a great get together, and they're huge Florida Gator fans. Her and her husband Tyler both went there, and we were talking about it. And they have two young kids, 4 years old and 2 years old, and we were talking about football and how they are going up to the spring game. And it was funny, they called it a trial run to see if they could make it to a full regular season game. So for families with young kids, it is probably a bummer because it's a really cheap way to get your family up there. Hotel prices are still high, but not nearly as high as they would be. And then, to your point, tying NIL with everything, you could almost run it like a golf tournament, right? I was at a charity. I got invited by a vendor to a charity scramble on Friday, and every hole there was different charities there. And you know who all the biggest donors were people that were there representing companies as corporate sponsors. We got up to one hole, and we knew we weren't going to do it. It was basically a long drive guy. You pay him, $20, and he can hit the drive for you instead of you hitting it. And he said, if you get up to this level, you're entered for a chance to win 2 tickets to Pebble Beach, but you have to hole out from 150 yards, which is a safe bet because no one's going to do that. None of these amateurs, especially with alcohol in every hole. But they had a leaderboard of donors, and people weren't putting their names. They were putting their company's names. And the guy I was with, I won't say the company because they don't sponsor us just yet, at least. The top donation so far was $300. He goes out, pulls out his corporate credit card, says, put me down for 400. I want my company's name on the top of the leaderboard. Like, people are competitive, and there's certain ways. I think you could use that golf scramble format. If anyone's ever been to one that is solely focused on raising money for charity and tie that into NIL, you could find different things to do. And I'm not sure what that is because I just kind of thought of it off the top of my head when you were speaking. But yeah, I think there is value, but there's no value whatsoever in a traditional padded spring game anymore.
Yeah, I just don't think it makes a lot of sense. Just for anything, right? Like you talked about injuries, tampering, expenses, just all the things, right? Like there's just, you got to be creative, right? And that's, if the marketing team needs help, just hit up me and Richie and we'll be happy to help you be creative. Cause I think we solved the issue here today. Richie, give Roback some love and then we'll move on here.
Yes, go to roback.com, RHOBACK.com, and you will get 20% off your first order with promo code DFNS20. That's DFNS20 at roback.com. They have very limited college teams that they work with, but Florida State is one of them. And both TJ, myself, and even producer Harlan all have plenty of Roback Florida State gear, but also what I'm wearing right now, just a performance pullover. All of their stuff is performance, whether it's their polos, their hoodies, their joggers, their shorts. Some of the most comfortable gear you'll ever wear. I rarely go a weekend without putting one of my Roback polos, hoodies, or a performance pullover like this on. Roback.com, RHOBACK.com, promo code DFNS20. I promise once you buy from them once, you will be glad to go back and buy from them again.
Appreciate Roback for their support. All right, Richie, I know this may not be something we're thinking about this year like we were last year, booking trips to Charlotte, but it seems like in 2026 and beyond, the ACC may be changing up the way that they do conference championship weekend. Obviously, a lot has been discussed about college football playoff expansion, and so I'm going to run you through a couple of scenarios here and a couple of thoughts and see what you think on it. I texted you the FS or the ACC one earlier. I may hit you with some of the other ones too after we talk about the ACC's option. But the problem, in theory, is that college football expansion is coming, and so how do you decide your representatives from each conference, and how do you keep teams interested in playing in conference championships? Lane Kiffin came out for the SEC and basically said, like, why would we even want to go play there? If we lose, we might be out of the thing. And Rhett Lashley kind of said the same thing, like, hey, we could just take a bye this week and we'd be in at 11-1. Why are we going to play this game? And so I do think that these conferences have an issue if they want to keep conference championship weekend a thing that they need to fix. They need to resolve. So the two ACC options, let's talk about both of them. One would be that the ACC's regular season champion, right? You win the most games in the regular season. You're the 1 seed in the ACC after tiebreakers, before, if no tiebreakers are needed right now, like whatever, right? Like SMU last year. You go undefeated in the conference. Nobody else is undefeated. You're in, right? You're the ACC champion by winning the regular season. And then 2 and 3, this year it would have been Clemson and Miami, would play for the spot in the playoff. Now, they wouldn't be crowned the ACC champions, even though they won on championship weekend, but they would get into the playoffs by winning that essentially the ACC championship would be a play-in game, and between 2 and 3, number 1 would just go on. I'll tell you, I don't hate that. The other option, I do hate this one. 4 teams would play, 1 versus 4 and 2 versus 3. That would take place on the last weekend of the regular season. I know already the alarm bells. What about rivalry weekend and stuff? Obviously, 4 ACC teams play 4 SEC teams. We'll talk about that in a minute. But 1 versus 4 on the last weekend of the regular season, 2 versus 3 on that same weekend, and then the winners would advance to play in the ACC championship game, and both of those teams advance to the playoff. Let's say 1 beats 4 and 2 beats 3, 1 versus 2 in Charlotte. Both winners move on, and that's how you crown your champion. I don't like that one as much. I don't like adding an extra game. I don't like the idea that a team could be 8-0 in conference and then lose to the 4 seed because maybe their quarterback gets hurt or something dumb, right? And you devalue the regular season by doing that. I like the first option better. I don't think there's any perfect options out there, but to add some intrigue, to keep teams interested in the regular season and moving on, I like the first option better. I don't know what your thoughts are, but that's what is being rumored right now.
Yeah, so it'll never happen just because there's too much money involved, unlike spring games. Just get rid of conference championship games. There's no point to them, in my opinion. If you were the best team throughout the season, then in that conference, then you are the conference champion. It's like I hate how college basketball, Florida State has 2 ACC conference champs where they did not win the regular season. And I value the 2020 regular season championship far more than either of those tournament champions. Because you get hot, you can win, 4 straight games, and okay, now you're the conference champs. You get to hang a banner. I think that's silly. I get that, this is going to be, a dynamic document, so to speak, where it's always changing. But I like the idea of if you won your regular season conference outright, you're the ones who should get in, and you should not guarantee a bid to whoever wins the conference championship game. Because in theory, it obviously it was a 14 playoff, and when Alabama knocked off Georgia in 2023, everyone knew Georgia was one of the best 4 teams in the country. But because of politics, they couldn't put Texas in without Bama, and they wanted Bama in. It should have been Georgia and Florida State in there, in my opinion. And I'll die on that hill, but that's another thing for another day. The game is evolving, so it'll be interesting to see. But yeah, I think the regular season champs. So kind of going opposite of college basketball, where the conference tourney champs are guaranteed that spot. I think the regular season conference champions of the Big 5 or the Big 4 conferences, and then the Group of 5 team, they should be the ones guaranteed. And you couldn't do that with a Group of 5 because you're lumping a bunch of teams together. So maybe the 2 highest ranked teams from those conferences play. I don't know. I'm sure they've talked about all these ideas before in different ones. And when you get enough people in a room, it's hard to be in agreement. It gets tricky. But yeah, I just think there's a better way to decide this without adding games specifically. I think the last thing you need to do is, okay, you're the 1 seed, and now you want me to play 2 more games just before the playoffs? Like that makes no sense to me. I do not like that recommendation at all. But I do think the regular season should be rewarded because it's been so diluted now with the expansion of the playoff, and simply, in theory, we've had 7-5 ACC teams go to Charlotte and win. Does anybody want to see them in a playoff? I don't.
Right. Yeah. You do that 1 versus 4 thing, and I'm telling you, there's going to be a year where, Florida State, think about the teams they play out of conference, right? They play Florida every year. They've got a bunch of big out of conference games coming up. They play Notre Dame every few years. I mean, there would be a year where Florida State could have, and I hate to make Florida State this team, but say Florida State's the 3 seed, right? They've lost 1 conference game and they've dropped, or maybe they've lost 2 conference games and they're the 4 seed, right? And they've lost 2 out of conference games. They dropped to a Georgia and a Florida, or the Georgia and Notre Dame, or whatever. And they're 8-4 and Clemson's 12-0. Already having beat Florida State 1 time. And then Florida State upsets them in the conference championship, and Clemson somehow left out. Like, could you imagine? I mean, just reverse the roles. Say it was Clemson losing to South Carolina and other,
So,
right? Like, could you imagine that? Like, that is
so
it
they wouldn't
completely
be left out.
devalues the regular season even more than we already have.
So that's in that scenario, Clemson would not be left out. They would absolutely get an at-large bid. But at the same time, Florida State, in the current state of the rules, would be hosting and be a top 4 seed, and Clemson
Well,
would be like 6 or 7 going on the road.
so the problem with the at-large is Clemson would only get an at-large bid there if there were 16 teams. If we go to 14, they probably wouldn't, because when it's 14, it's going to be 4 SEC, 4 Big 12, 4 Big 10, 2 ACC, 2 Big 12. There's 10. Group of 5 team, there's 11. And if Notre Dame's ranked in the top 14, they're in. Like, that's the qualifier.
Yeah.
So in that scenario, if there's 16 teams, Clemson absolutely would be in. If there's 14, they get screwed. And then, what the SEC and Big Ten are discussing, just really quickly, the Big Ten is, kind of toying with the idea of 1 and 2 play, but they're both already in. And then 3 plays 6, 4 plays 5. And the winners of 3 versus 6, 4 versus 5 are in as well. That's not terrible. 1 and 2 are automatically in no matter who wins, by how much, whatever. They're the Big Ten's top 2 seeds. The SEC is considering that as well. But the SEC also has the idea of maybe doing 4 play-in games where number 1 plays 8, 2 plays 7, 3 plays 6, 4 plays 5. If I'm an SEC fan and I go undefeated in the SEC, which we all hated, I get it. But if you go undefeated in the SEC and then somehow you just have one bad game against the 8 seed and you somehow get left out, like, to me, that's the worst option out of all of them. It is like saying that 1 and 8 somehow have the same probability of maybe making the playoff, right? Like, this year it would have been Texas versus Ole Miss. And I know Ole Miss pissed down their leg a couple of times, but like, could you imagine going number 1 in the SEC and then having to play Ole Miss and if you lose that game, if Ole Miss is hot, you're out. Like, that's absurd. So, yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of stuff they need to fix with this sport, but how they fix this conference championship weekend, like you said, it should probably just go away, and we should back the playoffs up some so that we're not having games on January 25th for national championships. But if you're going to keep it, they got a heck of a problem to figure out how to keep it, because I agree. I agree with you too. The regular season is more impressive than what happens in a one-off game, especially with conference realignment. So I don't know. It's a mess, but hopefully they can get it figured out.
Yeah, and that's just absurd, because I had not heard that yet, that they would have the SEC would eventually, have a game one versus 2, and they both know they're getting in regardless. That would look like a champ sports bowl, because who is going to play any player that means anything in a game like that? I just can't imagine what coaches would say, like, so you're making me play a top 5 team in the country, and what you are telling us openly is a completely meaningless game just to get some TV dollars. Like, if I was a coach, I would say absolutely not. I'm like, I will forfeit this game because you already said I have a spot in the playoff.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't think there's that, it used to mean something to win your conference championship. As much as we've devalued the regular season, I think we've devalued conference championships. Like, who cares right now that Oregon won the conference championship, right? Like, who cares right now that Georgia won their conference championship? Because they went to the playoffs and got smoked. Like, who cares? So, I don't know. I think we've devalued that. And so, do those get, like you just said, it's 1 versus 2, and I got some guys that are banged up because it's been a long season already anyway. Yeah, I'm just going to get ready for the playoffs, man. I want to win a national title. Like, I've got a roster that just went undefeated or 1 loss in the SEC or the Big Ten or even the ACC. I ain't going balls to the wall on this thing. And that's kind of why I like the ACC's option of, like, number 1 just gets a bye and 2 and 3 play for the second spot. I hate to give the ACC credit, but I actually kind of like that. Like, you earned it through winning all your ACC games or losing the least ACC games. Like, yeah, you're in. And then 2 and 3, you can play for the right to go. I don't hate that as much as I don't want to give the ACC credit.
Yeah, Jim Phillips. It might be a little too little too late, but that's okay. I think that's probably the smartest way that every conference would go. Now, the more that we're talking about it and I'm thinking about it, if you win your conference in a 12 or 8 game, some conferences 9 game football season, if you have the best record, I know there's unbalanced schedules and that's going to happen. It doesn't matter. You'll have tiebreakers for teams that are both, 7-2 or 8-1 or, whatever it may be. But Reward the team that had the best regular season, that showed up every single week. Yes, injuries happen. You fight through that. Florida State's 2023 team was far more hurt than anybody outside of the program will ever realize, and showed up every single week and found a way to win. They should have got in, and especially in this format, they would have gotten a bye. And imagine it having upwards of 4 to 5 weeks for guys like Keon and Johnny and everyone else that was banged up to get healthy. And not only that, but getting Brock Glenn a full month of prep before heading into it, or whoever it may have been. Yeah, it's just it doesn't make a lot of sense, and I think we're scrambling because college football has so much going on with NIL realignment, playoff expansion, and it's hard to put too much focus on any one thing. So I understand it to some extent, but figure it out.
Yeah,
because the sport is losing fans.
Yeah, I mean, you saw it in the national championship at ratings. Like once it gets to late January, people have moved on when they're. I mean, you think about what did we play our last game on November 27th, 28th, somewhere in there. And the national championship was 2 months after that, right? I guess it was on the 20th. I mean, fans of teams have checked out. Like they're on to the next thing, right? We were all worried about the playoffs and stuff, or the NFL playoffs and stuff. So, all right, let me give Garnet and Gold a little bit of love. GarnetandGold.com. If you're buying any gear, the FSU football gear that will come out in the next couple of months, if you're getting stuff for baseball, softball, whatever, make sure you're shopping at GarnetandGold.com. NOSLAW, NOSLAW, get you 10% or 15% off. Shoot, we can't get any of the percentages right today, Richie. Can't you get you 15% off on your order? Make sure that you're only shopping at Garnet and Gold. I'm actually going up this week for a little baseball, softball action, and I am going to shop in store. I'm not doing it online, but I'm excited about. I already know what I have picked out, and I'm ready to go. So you can try the code NOSLAW in store. It'll work better online though because they, it doesn't come down to if the person knows what you're talking about or not. But appreciate Garnet and Gold for their support. Just very quickly, it was good to see baseball continue to dominate. 7-0 on the season. Softball had a little bit of a slip up after they got really, really hot, but they lost a couple of games to Texas A&M yesterday. I think they're still 11-3 or something. So still off to a pretty good start, but a couple of rough losses yesterday. And some other sports are certainly going on in the spring that I've seen. Swimming and diving at the ACCs. I saw men's tennis upset number 9. Texas A&M beach volleyball started off, I think 4-0 with a top 10 win against LSU as well. So a bunch of stuff going on. And then I mentioned women's basketball with a big win on the road at number 20 or 23, Georgia Tech today. Shane with a super chat. We can look at that real quick. FSU needs to focus on acquiring real estate. Land acquisition for this university needs to be a priority. UF has 57 acres. Listen, Shane, I appreciate the super chat and the comment. Florida State, and I wonder how much they can do it. Like how, I don't know the geography of Tallahassee as well as, maybe even Richie does. But Florida does have so much land, but it's all a lot of it's unusable, isn't it? Like it feels like every time you go to UF, like everything is just right on top of each other. They had to put the baseball stadium way off out from where everything else is. So I don't really know what land is available or what's around. Like that's certainly not my forte, but I think a lot of that UF land is pretty unusable if I'm understanding that correctly. So Richie, I don't know if you have a thought there or not.
Yeah, I'm in meetings with my company, and we think of Seminole County, how there's so much land that could be purchased, but it's all swampland. You can't build on it. It's not safe. It just makes no sense to own it. You're just owning it to say you do. But to your point, and then on the flip side, if you go to Osceola County here, where I live, I live in Orange, but I work in Osceola. There's a lot of land to be bought that can be used, and that's why Osceola is the fastest growing county in the state of Florida right now. I don't know the dynamics between Atchula and Leon, so I can't speak to that. But they did invest in College Town. The boosters own the majority of that land, and they benefit, which is why when you go to places, the local spots in the College Town, it's a smart thing to do because you are essentially giving money back to the boosters as well. But we can maybe get an expert on here for a one-off video just to talk about it because I think it is a very intriguing topic, to be honest.
Yeah, if somebody's a land, I don't know what to even call it, but yeah, like a real estate expert up there, then I'm definitely happy to chat. Hit my DMs and we'll do it. Richie, you got any shout outs or anything?
Yeah, shout out Coach Ham and the basketball team. I know it was a rough day yesterday. They did fight back. I will say last year the team was so frustrating. because they would get down and then they just lay down. They got down big in the first half, came back, got it within 6 in the second half. My wife's getting mad because I'm watching the game during this party where we're supposed to be with all our friends. And of course, they end up blowing it at the end, which is fine. But they did beat Miami earlier in the week. And Matthew Cleveland, I think I know why he changed his number to 0. My shout out for him is because he knew he would win 0 games in his 2 years at Miami against his former team in Florida State. So shout out Matthew Cleveland.
Foregone conclusion that Florida State beats Miami. That's my only requirement for a new coach is that we continue that dominance. I think it's 14 the last 15 and
14 and 15, yeah.
Yeah, and 16 the last 20 or 16 the last 18. Like it is just a staggering number of wins that we have piled up since 2016 against that program. Which we, wish them nothing but the worst. I don't have any shout outs or anything like that today. So yeah, we're good. Make sure that you're tuned in. Make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. I think we are doing a live show on Tuesday. I know that we didn't last week. It's been a little dead, not a lot going on, but we'll do a call-in show on Tuesday morning. And I appreciate you guys, as always, for tuning in. Appreciate BetUS, Guthrie's Garnet and Gold, Roback for their support. We will talk to you guys soon. Go Noles.